Thanks. Okay, so I think I was introduced as telling you what I know. In fact, that's not what I'm going to do. I'm going to tell you what I want. So, as Ben mentioned, I'm Charles. I work at the CBD Secretariat, and I must confess I'm not a lawyer, but I do have legal needs, as I think so many countries do. So I'm going to tell you how many people are lawyers in the audience, or studying to be lawyers, or just wish they were lawyers, or maybe you know a lawyer. Okay, good. Wish they weren't. Okay. All right, good. So we have good legal representation in the room. I feel safer now. This is fantastic. Now I'm going to be very brief because I think that's usually quite useful. This is my advice to everyone: be brief. And I want to take you back on a little tour of what happened 11 years ago at the last World Parks Congress, which I think was the most significant thing that came out of Durban. And that was this. The protected area governance matrix was designed, and I was very much involved before this was kind of launched at the Congress. This was a recognition that we've been focusing a bit too much on just management. There's a whole other aspect to this, which is about how decisions are made, not just the fact that decisions are made in a vacuum, but someone makes a decision, there's a power structure, there's institutional structures that are working with each other in a context of decision making. And sometimes it's explicit, sometimes it's not explicit. In fact, it can be quite complicated. And this was an attempt to try to show the different kinds of governance that exist. So this was actually adopted at the Parks Congress, and it's gone in through UN or IUCN processes, and then eventually through the processes of the Convention on Biodiversity, where it's been given its blessing by the 194 parties to the CBD. So the way the world used to think about this issue was this: governance by government. And if you look at the early list of protected areas, these were all protected areas and national parks that were government protected areas. And in fact, it's never been quite this simple. It's always been much more complicated, but this is what you would see in official lists, and this is the way it was generally presented to the world. Parks and protected areas are by government. So this was a recognition, actually, that there's several other kinds of governance. Decisions are made by many other people. Sometimes it's shared governance, and that includes transboundary conservation, collaborative governance with the private sector, with private landowners and businesses, and every combination that you can imagine. And as well, joint governance structures. And sometimes it's just private governance. And sometimes it's governance by indigenous peoples and local communities. So these are the structures that were presented, and there was long discussions about this, and quite honestly, it wasn't comfortable to everyone that we would be opening it up this wide. Now, in 2010, the parties to the CBD agreed on the strategic plan for biodiversity and 20 Aichi biodiversity targets to be achieved by 2020. And there were some ambitious targets, and Alejandro mentioned some of the gaps in order to reach those targets. And the targets are not just about coverage and increasing the size, they're also about connectivity and effective forms of management and governance, and many other things. So it's a very long phrase, which you'll find, which is Aichi Target 11. And achieving it will not be possible by just focusing here, governance by government. And in fact, this is where you find most, if there is a legal framework in a country, it often is here. So, I said I would tell you what we need. What we need is to think very carefully in a very structured way, very methodically, with good partnerships on how to provide legal frameworks and technical assistance to countries so that we can do shared governance, private governance, and governance by indigenous peoples and local communities. Now, you're the experts, so I have very high expectations from you. Thank you very much.